Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for nearly 2 decades, and throughout that remarkable span of time, he had encountered thousands of families from every conceivable background and circumstance. He had witnessed joy and sorrow, celebration and grief, humor and heartbreak, all playing out on his stage in ways that reminded him daily of the beautiful complexity of human experience. Yet, on this particular Friday afternoon in early December 2024, something was about to unfold that would shake him to his very foundation and leave him unable to maintain the professional composure that had become his trademark. What began as a routine game show taping would transform into one of the most emotionally powerful moments ever captured on television, a moment that would remind millions of viewers that love, even in the face of devastating loss, possesses a strength that transcends death itself. Before we continue with this extraordinary story that brought Steve Harvey to tears and left an entire studio unable to speak, if you find yourself moved by stories about enduring love, unbreakable promises, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable loss, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These profound stories deserve to be shared widely, and your support ensures that voices like the one you are about to hear reach the hearts of those who desperately need to hear them. The Morrison family had traveled from Charleston, South Carolina, to participate in Family Feud, arriving at the studio with the kind of quiet dignity that immediately distinguished them from the typical boisterous energy that characterized most family teams. The family consisted of 5 members spanning 3 generations, and leading them was 53-year-old Catherine Morrison, a woman whose elegant bearing and composed demeanor suggested someone who had faced significant challenges and emerged with her grace intact. Beside Catherine stood her daughter Amanda, age 28, followed by Amanda's husband James, then Catherine's son David, age 25, and finally Catherine's mother, 76-year-old Eleanor, who rounded out the team with her silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. During the pre-show briefing, the production staff had noted something unusual about the Morrison family dynamic. While they were clearly close and supportive of one another, there was an underlying current of protectiveness toward Catherine, as if the other family members were unconsciously arranging themselves around her in a formation that suggested both support and vigilance. When Catherine spoke, which she did with measured thoughtfulness, the others listened with an intensity that went beyond typical family attentiveness. There was a story here, the producers sensed, though they could not yet discern its exact nature. Catherine herself presented a study in contradictions. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with shoulder-length auburn hair that showed only a few threads of silver, clear hazel eyes, and features that would have been considered classically beautiful were it not for a certain tightness around her mouth and eyes that suggested someone holding themselves together through conscious effort. She wore a simple navy dress with a pearl necklace, and on her left hand, she wore a wedding ring alongside an engagement ring that caught the studio lights with their sparkle. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, as if she were navigating her way through the world with extreme care, afraid that any sudden motion might shatter something fragile within her. When Steve Harvey made his way through the family introductions, greeting each member with his characteristic warmth and humor, he noticed immediately the protective way the Morrison family oriented themselves around Catherine. When he reached her, extending his hand in greeting, she took it with a firm handshake and met his eyes with a directness that was both courageous and heartbreaking in ways he could not yet understand. Steve spoke with genuine interest and respect. "Mrs. Morrison, it is wonderful to have you and your family here today. Your daughter tells me you work as a hospice nurse. That must be incredibly meaningful, but also very challenging work." Catherine nodded, her voice steady and clear when she responded. "It is both of those things, Mr. Harvey. I have been doing hospice work for 15 years now. There is something sacred about being present with people during their final journey, about helping them find peace and dignity in their last days. It is difficult work, but it is also deeply rewarding. Something in the way she spoke about end-of-life care, with a knowledge that seemed to go beyond professional experience, caught Steve's attention. There was a personal familiarity in her words, a resonance that suggested she understood the hospice experience from multiple perspectives. Steve continued with gentle curiosity. 15 years in hospice work. That takes a special kind of strength and compassion. What drew you to that particular field? Catherine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something profound crossing her face before she composed herself. Personal experience, Mr. Harvey. Sometimes life gives us challenges that, if we survive them, equip us to help others facing similar challenges. I learned about hospice care during a very difficult time in my life, and when I came through it, I knew I wanted to give back what had been given to me during that period. The conversation moved on as Steve continued down the line, but the exchange had planted a seed of curiosity. There was clearly a significant story behind Catherine's calm exterior, though Steve could not yet know that before the day was over, that story would emerge in a way that would leave him emotionally devastated and profoundly moved. The game began with the Morrison family, competing against the Patterson family from Ohio, a traditional multi-generational group that brought enthusiastic energy and competitive spirit to the stage. The contrast between the two families was notable, where the Patterson family celebrated each correct answer with elaborate high fives and vocal excitement. The Morrison family responded to their successes with quieter appreciation, offering each other supportive touches and encouraging words delivered in low voices that suggested a communication style forged through shared adversity. Catherine played well when her turns came, demonstrating quick thinking and an intuitive understanding of common survey responses. Yet there was something about her participation that seemed almost secondary to some other purpose. She appeared to be present, but also holding something in reserve, as if the game itself was merely a vehicle for something more important that had yet to be revealed. As the rounds progressed, the Morrison family began to pull ahead, their quiet coordination and strategic thinking proving effective against their more demonstrative opponents. During a commercial break, while the game board was being reset, Steve found himself drawn back to Catherine, who stood at her position with her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze distant as if she were somewhere else entirely, despite her physical presence on the stage. Steve approached her with the cameras still rolling for behind-the-scenes footage. "Mrs. Morrison, you are doing great out here. Your family is playing really well together. You all have a special connection. I can see that." Catherine turned to face him, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained composure slipped, revealing a depth of grief so profound that Steve actually took a step back from the force of it. She recovered quickly, but not before Steve had seen something that told him this woman was carrying a burden of almost unimaginable weight. Catherine's voice remained steady, but there was a tremor underneath it that had not been present before. "Thank you, Mr. Harvey. My family is everything to me. They are the reason I am still here. They are the reason I get up every morning and keep going. Without them, I would not have survived the last 3 years." The specificity of that time frame, 3 years, hung in the air between them. Steve's expression shifted from his typical game show enthusiasm to something more serious, more human. Steve spoke with gentle concern. 3 years. That sounds like there is a story there. Are you okay, Mrs. Morrison? Catherine looked at him with eyes that suddenly brimmed with unshed tears, though she blinked them back with visible effort. "I am okay, Mr. Harvey. Or rather, I am learning how to be okay. I am here today because of a promise I made, and keeping that promise has kept me alive when there were many days I did not want to be." The production assistant signaled that they were about to resume filming, and the moment passed, But Steve could not shake the feeling that something significant was building, that Catherine Morrison had come to his stage with a purpose beyond playing a game show, and that purpose was about to reveal itself in ways he could not anticipate. The game resumed and continued through several more rounds, with the Morrison family ultimately securing a decisive victory and earning the right to play fast money for the $25,000 prize. As the family gathered to decide which two members would participate in the bonus round, Catherine did something unexpected. She stepped forward with a determination that suggested this moment was what she had been preparing for since arriving at the studio. Catherine's voice carried clearly across the stage as she addressed her family. "I would like to play fast money. I need to play it. There is something I need to do, and this is the right moment." Her daughter Amanda looked at her mother with an expression that combined concern and understanding, as if she had been expecting this moment and dreading it simultaneously. Amanda reached out and took her mother's hand. "Are you sure, Mom? We can do this another way. You do not have to put yourself through this." Catherine squeezed her daughter's hand, but her resolve did not waver. "I am sure, sweetheart. This is what I came here to do. This is how I keep my promise." The cryptic exchange left Steve and the production team uncertain about what was happening, but Catherine's determination was absolute. Her son David volunteered to play fast money with her, and the decision was made. David would go first, answering the 5 questions to establish a baseline score, and then Catherine would have her turn. David's round proceeded normally, with the young man answering the rapid-fire questions with quick thinking and decent instincts, ultimately accumulating 131 points. That meant Catherine needed 69 points to secure the $25,000 prize for her family. As David exited the soundproof booth and Catherine prepared to take her position at the podium, Steve noticed that her hands were shaking and her breathing had become rapid and shallow, as if she were preparing herself for something far more significant than answering 5 game show questions. Steve walked Catherine to the fast money podium, and as he did, he spoke to her quietly, his words picked up by the microphone but delivered with genuine concern rather than performance. "Mrs. Morrison, are you all right? You do not have to do this if it is too much. This is just a game show. Your well-being is more important than any prize." Catherine looked at Steve with an intensity that took his breath away. "Mr. Harvey, I need to do this. 3 years ago, my husband of 26 years was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to his death was only 4 months. During those 4 months, we made each other promises about how we would face his death and how I would face my life after he was gone. I am here today because I made him a promise, and I need to honor that promise publicly, in front of witnesses, so that I cannot back out. So that I have to keep living even when living feels impossible." Steve Harvey stood completely frozen, his face reflecting the sudden understanding that this was not going to be a typical fast money round, that whatever was about to happen would transcend the boundaries of entertainment and enter into something far more profound and painful. Steve's voice was gentle but shaken. "Mrs. Morrison, I am so sorry for your loss. If you need to share something, if you need to honor your husband, we are here. We are listening." Catherine positioned herself at the podium, gripping its edges with white-knuckled intensity. The studio had fallen into an expectant silence, sensing that something significant was about to occur. Steve prepared to ask the fast money questions, though the game itself now felt almost secondary to whatever revelation Catherine was preparing to deliver. The timer appeared on the screen, and Steve began the rapid-fire questions, his usual enthusiasm notably absent, replaced by a careful gentleness that acknowledged the emotional stakes of this moment. Steve asked the first question with uncharacteristic softness. "Name something you might do every day to honor someone who has passed away." Without hesitation, Catherine answered, her voice clear and steady despite the tears that had begun to stream down her face. "Keep living." Steve paused almost imperceptibly, the weight of that answer settling over him before he continued. "Name a reason someone might want to give up." "Unbearable grief." "Name something that keeps people going when life gets hard." "Promises made to dying loved ones." "Name something you might talk about with someone who is no longer here." "Everything. I tell him everything." "Name the hardest thing about losing someone you love." "Learning to want to live again." The buzzer sounded, marking the end of the 20 seconds, but the studio remained in absolute silence. These were not typical game show answers. These were raw, unfiltered expressions of profound grief and the struggle to survive it. Steve stood looking at Catherine with tears streaming down his own face, all pretense of hosting a game show abandoned in the face of such naked honesty. Steve's voice broke as he spoke. "Mrs. Morrison, those answers, they came from somewhere very deep. Before we reveal the scores, before we find out if you won, I think you have something you need to tell us. I think your husband's story, and your promise to him, that needs to be heard." Catherine nodded, no longer even attempting to hold back her tears. "His name was Daniel Morrison. We met when we were both 25 years old, and from our first date, I knew he was the person I wanted to spend my life with. We married 2 years later, and for 26 years, we built a beautiful life together. We raised 2 incredible children. We created a home filled with love and laughter. We were best friends, partners in everything, completely devoted to each other." The studio remained silent except for the sound of Catherine's voice and the quiet crying of audience members who were beginning to understand the depth of what they were witnessing. Catherine continued, her words flowing now with the force of something that had been held back too long. "In April of 2021, Daniel started having stomach pains and losing weight. By the time we got the diagnosis in May, the cancer had already spread throughout his body. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist told us that with aggressive treatment, he might have 6 to 12 months. Without treatment, maybe 3 to 4 months. Daniel chose not to pursue aggressive treatment. He said he did not want to spend his final months sick from chemotherapy. He wanted to be present, to be himself, to spend quality time with the people he loved while he still could." Catherine's voice grew stronger despite her tears. "Those 4 months between his diagnosis and his death were the most precious and most painful time of my life. We talked about everything. We said everything that needed to be said. We cried together and laughed together and held each other through the terror and the grief of knowing our time was ending. And during those conversations, Daniel made me promise him something." The entire studio leaned forward, everyone present desperate to know what promise this dying man had extracted from his beloved wife. Catherine looked directly at the camera, as if speaking to her late husband wherever he might be. "Daniel made me promise that I would not give up on life after he died. He said he knew me well enough to know that losing him would make me want to give up, that the grief would be so overwhelming that I would stop wanting to live. And he was right. After he died, I did not want to be here anymore. Every morning I woke up, and the first thought I had was that I wanted to die so I could be with him again." Steve Harvey's face reflected the devastating emotional impact of Catherine's words. He made no attempt to hide his tears or maintain any professional distance from what he was hearing. Catherine pressed on with the relentless honesty of someone who had decided that her truth needed to be spoken completely. "Daniel made me promise 3 specific things. First, that I would stay alive and keep showing up for our children, even when showing up felt impossible. Second, that I would find ways to still experience joy, even if that joy felt wrong or disloyal at first. And third, that within 3 years of his death, I would do something that scared me, something that pushed me outside my comfort zone, something that proved I was still fully alive and engaged with the world rather than just going through the motions. Catherine looked at Steve with an expression that combined exhaustion, determination, and a fragile hope. Coming here today is me keeping that third promise. I am terrified of being in front of cameras, of being the center of attention, of speaking publicly about my grief. But Daniel knew that if I could push myself to do something scary, something uncomfortable, it would prove that I was still capable of growth and change and courage. He knew that keeping that promise would force me to step outside the protective shell I had built around myself. She continued, her voice now trembling with the effort of speaking these truths aloud. For 3 years, I have kept myself alive through sheer willpower and the promises I made to Daniel as he lay dying in our bed with hospice care, helping us through his final days. I have gotten up every morning even when I wanted to stay in bed forever. I have gone to work helping other people through the dying process, using my own experience to comfort them even when my own grief felt unbearable. I have shown up for my children's lives, celebrating their achievements and supporting them through their own grief, even when I felt like I had nothing left to give. I have forced myself to experience moments of joy, watching sunsets and listening to music and laughing at my grandchildren's antics, even when laughter felt like a betrayal of Daniel's memory. Catherine's tears were flowing freely now, but her voice remained strong. And now I am here, on national television, in front of all these people and all the cameras that will broadcast this to millions of viewers, and I am telling the truth about what the last 3 years have been like. I am telling the truth about how hard it has been to keep living when the person I loved most in the world is gone. I am telling the truth about the promises that have kept me alive when I did not want to be. And by doing this, by speaking these words out loud in this public way, I am honoring Daniel's final request. I am proving that I am still here, still fighting, still keeping the promises I made to him, even though every day without him feels like trying to breathe underwater. The studio was filled with the sound of people crying openly. Steve Harvey stood with his hand over his mouth, tears streaming down his face, his body language reflecting someone who had been emotionally devastated by what he had just heard. He turned away from Catherine for a moment, walking a few steps toward the edge of the stage, his shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. When Steve finally turned back, his face was wet with tears, and his voice was barely controlled. "Mrs. Morrison, I need a moment. I am sorry, but I need a moment. Because what you just shared, that is the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I have ever heard on this stage." Steve walked back to Catherine and embraced her, holding her as she sobbed against his shoulder. The audience rose to their feet, not in applause, but in a gesture of respect and shared grief, bearing witness to this moment of profound vulnerability and courage. When they finally pulled apart, Steve addressed the cameras directly, making no attempt to hide his emotional state. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to reveal Mrs. Morrison's fast money scores in a moment, but I want to say something first. What we just witnessed goes beyond entertainment. This is a woman who has lived through unimaginable loss and has kept herself alive through the power of promises made to someone she loved more than life itself. This is what real love looks like. This is what real courage looks like. This is what it means to honor someone even after they are gone." Steve turned back to Catherine, his voice still rough with emotion. "Your husband, Daniel, he knew you so well. He knew exactly what promises would keep you here. He knew how to love you even from beyond death. And Mrs. Morrison, by keeping those promises, by standing here today and sharing your truth, you are showing all of us what devotion looks like. You are showing us that love does not end when someone dies. You are showing us that the promises we make matter, especially the hardest ones. The moment finally came to reveal Catherine's fast money scores. As Steve read through her answers, something remarkable became clear. Despite the deeply personal nature of her responses, despite answering from a place of raw grief rather than strategic game show thinking, her answers had resonated with the survey respondents in unexpected ways. Keep living as something you might do every day to honor someone who passed away was the number 2 answer with 23 points. Unbearable grief as a reason someone might want to give up was the number 3 answer with 18 points. Promises made to dying loved ones as something that keeps people going when life gets hard was the number 4 answer with 12 points. Everything as something you might talk about with someone no longer here was not on the board. Learning to want to live again as the hardest thing about losing someone you love was the number 1 answer with 34 points. Catherine had scored 87 points, bringing the family's total to 218 points, well over the 200 needed to win the $25,000. But as the Morrison family celebrated their victory with quiet tears and tight embraces, it was clear that the money was entirely secondary to what had actually occurred on that stage. Steve stood with the Morrison family, and when the initial moment of celebration had passed, he turned to Catherine once more. "Mrs. Morrison, you won, but more importantly, you kept your promise to Daniel. You did something that scared you. You pushed yourself outside your comfort zone. You proved that you are still fully alive. He would be so proud of you." Catherine nodded, unable to speak through her tears, and her children and mother surrounded her in a protective embrace that made clear how much this family had endured together and how fiercely they loved one another. The episode aired 3 weeks later, and the response was unprecedented in ways that no one could have anticipated. The segment featuring Catherine's story became one of the most shared pieces of content in television history, viewed over 200 million times across various platforms within the first week of airing. News organizations covered it extensively, grief counselors shared it with their clients, hospice organizations used it in training materials, and millions of people around the world found themselves deeply moved by Catherine's raw honesty about loss and survival. The response from viewers was overwhelming and deeply personal. The Family Feud production office received over 50,000 letters and emails in the weeks following the episode's airing, the vast majority from people sharing their own experiences of loss and explaining how Catherine's story had helped them feel less alone in their grief. Widows and widowers wrote to say that her description of not wanting to live anymore but forcing herself to keep going had perfectly captured their own experience. People who had made promises to dying loved ones wrote to say that watching Catherine honor her promise had inspired them to honor their own. Hospice workers wrote to thank Catherine for speaking publicly about the reality of grief and the long, difficult process of learning to live with devastating loss. The American Hospice Foundation reached out to Catherine, asking if she would be willing to speak at their national conference about her experience both as a hospice nurse and as someone who had been on the receiving end of hospice care for her husband. Catherine agreed, and her keynote speech at the conference was met with a standing ovation and led to her becoming a sought-after speaker on topics related to grief, caregiving, and keeping promises to those who have died. Steve Harvey himself was profoundly affected by his encounter with Catherine and her story. In interviews following the episode's airing, he spoke openly about how meeting Catherine had changed his understanding of love and loss and resilience. He said that watching her keep her promise to Daniel, watching her stand on that stage and speak her truth despite her terror and grief, had been one of the most powerful experiences of his entire career. He said it had reminded him of the responsibility he had to create space for real human stories, not just entertainment, and that Catherine had taught him something crucial about the difference between the two. 6 months after the episode aired, Steve arranged for a follow-up segment that checked in with Catherine and explored how her life had changed since her appearance on the show. The transformation in Catherine was remarkable. While the grief was still clearly present, there was also something else now. A lightness that had not been there before. A sense of having turned a corner, of having survived something that she had not been certain she could survive. During that follow-up segment, Catherine spoke about how the experience of publicly honoring her promise to Daniel had been profoundly liberating. She said that for 3 years she had been carrying her grief privately, maintaining a composed exterior while struggling internally with thoughts of not wanting to continue living. She said that speaking her truth publicly, admitting that she had not wanted to be alive, acknowledging how hard she had fought to keep Daniel's promises, had somehow lessened the grip that the grief had on her. Catherine explained that in the months since the episode aired, she had received thousands of messages from other widows and widowers, many of whom had also been privately struggling with the desire to give up. She said that connecting with others who understood her experience had helped her feel less isolated, less strange, less wrong for having those thoughts. She said she had learned that grief makes people feel things that seem frightening and unacceptable, but that those feelings are actually quite common, and sharing them openly can help others feel less alone. Most movingly, Catherine revealed that her appearance on Family Feud had led to an unexpected connection with another widow whose husband had also died of pancreatic cancer. The two women had formed a deep friendship, supporting each other through the ongoing challenges of grief and helping each other find reasons to keep living when living felt overwhelming. Catherine said that Daniel would have been pleased to know that keeping her promise to him had led to her helping someone else, that his death and her grief had somehow created meaning and connection rather than just devastation. The follow-up segment also included Catherine's children, who spoke about watching their mother keep the promises she had made to their father. Amanda, Catherine's daughter, explained that her parents' love story had always been central to their family's identity, and that watching her mother honor her father, even after his death, had shown her and her brother what real commitment looked like. She said it had been incredibly painful to watch her mother struggle through the worst of her grief, but that seeing her keep fighting, keep showing up, keep living even when she did not want to, had taught them about the strength of the human spirit and the power of love to transcend death. David, Catherine's son, shared that in the immediate aftermath of his father's death, he had been terrified that he would lose his mother too, not to death, but to grief. He said there had been days when his mother seemed so hollow, so absent, that he worried she was disappearing even though she was physically present. He said that knowing about the promises his mother had made to his father had given him hope during those dark times, and that watching her keep those promises had shown him that people could survive even the most devastating losses if they had something to hold on to. The most powerful moment of the follow-up segment came when Steve asked Catherine if she felt she had kept her promise to Daniel, if she felt she had honored what he had asked of her. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the question carefully, before she responded with the kind of hard-won wisdom that only comes from surviving something terrible. Catherine spoke with a calmness and certainty that had not been present during her original appearance. I have kept my promises to Daniel as best as I can. I have stayed alive even when I did not want to be. I have shown up for my children even when I felt I had nothing to give. I have forced myself to experience joy even when joy felt wrong. And I did something that scared me by coming on your show and telling our story publicly. But more than just keeping the letter of those promises, I think I have begun to honor their spirit. I think I am finally beginning to not just survive, but to actually live again. Not the same life I had with Daniel, because that life ended when he died, but a different life, a life shaped by loss, but not defined entirely by it. A life that honors what Daniel and I had, while also allowing for new experiences and new connections and new forms of meaning. She continued, her voice growing stronger. Daniel made me promise to keep living because he knew that if I gave up, if I let grief destroy me, then his death would have destroyed not just him, but also me. He would have taken both of us. By forcing myself to keep going, by keeping my promises to him, I have ensured that he did not take me with him. And I think that is what he wanted. He wanted me to have more life, even if he could not be here to share it with me. He wanted me to experience more joy, more connection, more meaning, even if he would not be present for those experiences. That was his final gift to me, those promises that kept me alive when I did not want to be, because now, 3 years later, I am beginning to want to be alive again. Not always, not every day, but more and more often. And I think that is what he hoped would happen. Steve Harvey listened to Catherine's words with visible emotion, and when she finished speaking, he reached across and took her hand. Mrs. Morrison, your husband Daniel was a wise man. He knew that the only way to truly love someone is to want good things for them, even when you cannot be there to share those good things. He loved you enough to force you to keep living, even when living felt impossible. And you loved him enough to honor that request, even when honoring it required enormous courage and strength. That is what real love looks like. Not the easy kind that exists when everything is good, but the hard kind that persists, even when everything is broken. The follow-up segment concluded with Catherine visiting Daniel's grave, a scene that was filmed with great sensitivity and respect. She sat beside his headstone, speaking to him as if he were still present, updating him on her life and thanking him for the promises that had kept her alive. She told him about appearing on Family Feud, about the response from viewers, about the connections she had made with other grieving people. She told him that she was keeping her promises, that she was still fighting to live even when living was hard, that she was honoring what they had by refusing to let his death destroy her completely. As the camera pulled back, showing Catherine sitting beside her husband's grave in the quiet cemetery, her voice could be heard saying one final thing. I am still here, Daniel. I am still here because you asked me to be. Some days, that is enough. Some days, I am grateful to be here. And I think maybe that is what you meant when you made me promise to keep living. You knew that eventually, if I just kept showing up, kept putting one foot in front of the other, kept honoring my promises even when I did not feel like it, eventually I would find my way back to wanting to be alive. You were right. You knew me better than I knew myself. I miss you every single day. But I am still here. And I am going to keep being here, for our children and our grandchildren, and for all the people who need to know that it is possible to survive loss, this devastating. I am going to keep being here because I promised you I would, and because increasingly I want to be. Thank you for loving me enough to make me promise. Thank you for knowing that I would need those promises to hold on to when everything else fell apart. Catherine Morrison continued her work as a hospice nurse, bringing to that role a depth of understanding and empathy that could only come from having experienced profound loss personally. She became an advocate for open conversations about grief, speaking publicly about the thoughts and feelings that grieving people often experience but feel ashamed to acknowledge. She helped normalize the reality that losing someone you love can make you not want to live anymore, and that having those feelings does not mean you are weak or broken, but simply human. She also became an advocate for having end-of-life conversations with loved ones, encouraging people not to wait until someone is dying to discuss how they want to be remembered and what promises they want their loved ones to keep. She said that the promises Daniel had asked her to make had quite literally saved her life, and that other families deserved the opportunity to have those conversations and make those promises while there was still time. Steve Harvey continued to reference Catherine's story in interviews and public appearances, holding it up as an example of the kind of profound human connection that could occur when people had the courage to be vulnerable and honest about their experiences. He said that meeting Catherine had reminded him that television, at its best, could be a platform for real human stories that connected people across distances and differences, and that creating space for those stories was one of the most important things he could do with his platform. If Catherine Morrison's story has touched your heart, if her courage to speak openly about grief and the promises that kept her alive has inspired you to think differently about loss, survival, and the power of love to transcend death, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, particularly someone who is grieving and struggling to find reasons to keep living. Reach out to that friend or family member who has experienced loss and might be quietly struggling in ways you cannot see. Have those difficult end-of-life conversations with your loved ones while there is still time, because as Catherine and Daniel showed us, the promises we make to dying loved ones can become the lifeline that keeps us tethered to life when grief threatens to sweep us away completely. Let Catherine's story remind us all that surviving devastating loss is possible, that keeping promises to those who have died is a profound act of love, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone we love is the promise that we will keep living even when they cannot, that we will honor their memory not by drowning in grief, but by refusing to let that grief destroy us, by choosing life even when life feels impossible, by showing up day after day until eventually, hopefully, we find that we are no longer just surviving, but actually living again.